Hey, it's Kaylee. You know me as the Parts Girl, and I work here at PartsEdge. Thanks for following this awesome journey as we highlight thought leaders and trailblazers, share best practices in fixed ops, and cover success stories of how dealers sell more parts and service. This is the PartsEdge podcast with Kaylee Felio. Let's break this down. Sometimes parts managers are really hesitant to believe that they need more sources. Being with PartsEdge for so long, we think anything's possible because we have technology. But can we break down just kind of why or show why it's important to have more sources?
Well, in fact, right now, Kaylee, we're going through a client that just migrated from CDK over to Techion. And it's just your worst nightmare. And not just a matter of changing one DMS to another, but trying to generate a stock order, the algorithm doesn't work well. I know this talks about changing DMSs, but when it comes to a source, there's a lot of different things that a source or stock group on dealer track, as they call it, they can accomplish. The myth that you only need a couple of sources anymore. I need one for my parts, I need one for my tires, and I need one for my gas, oil, and grease. And there's still a lot of dealerships that actually run that way. And I think the myth anymore is that, and this is one of the things we see with this migration we're going through is, the manufacturer's controlling my inventory anyway. It's amazing how many times we talk to dealers that are on RIM or Arrow, and we ask, do you generate a stock order on the parts that aren't guaranteed just to make sure you don't have an empty shelf? And they go, no. And so why do I need more sources? The manufacturer is controlling this. Well, there's source accounting, like I mentioned, for tires, gas, oil, and grease, and regular parts, but for pricing. We get requests all the time now for, hey, we're trying to get our grosses up and we need to increase our menu prices. We just talked to a dealer we're bringing on now, and the way he's doing it accomplished it, but he's doing a lot more work than he has to. We can, set that up and make it work properly. And believe it or not, the DMS gives you the ability to isolate a group of parts in a source, set up a price code so that you never have to worry about changing the cost or list or whatever. It's a matter of being educated as to what the abilities of these DMSs and what sources, what a source can do for them. And I think it's really more of a lack of education. And the other thing, Kaylee, and I'll close with this and you can go to the next question, but the DMS vendors, and I'm not picking on one or two, most of them, the last thing they want a parts manager to do is set up a whole bunch of sources. It means they have to support that. And less sources a manager has, and easier it is for their support people, to be able to take care of it. And that's really sad, When
you were running a store, how many sources did you have? I mean, obviously PartsEdge wasn't created at that point.
Oh, before PartsEdge? And without what we do?
Yeah.
I had about 20.
Yeah.
And, I was lucky enough and large enough that I did have some people that, could manipulate the parts on a daily basis. Most dealerships don't, let alone.
They're working managers, really.
Yeah, exactly. But how many could a parts manager effectively manage? Probably somewhere between 15 and 20 sources.
Okay.
If they're using some source by movement, if you happen to be on dealer track, you have dynamic movement within one source, so you don't need multiple sources like CDK and Reynolds, but 12 to 20, if you're going to do it on your own, is realistic. And I can give you some real simple ways. You're breaking out accessories and you want those to price at list. You got menu items, you want them at fixed price. You got maintenance items, captive maintenance that you want to matrix. There's just three real quick breakouts. Forget gas, oil, and grease and tire.
Well, this isn't a question I really outlined, but I have to ask because, you know, when you ran the stores, you were about 20, or the store. Um, and a lot of people who don't know, who are listening, it was one of the largest dealer or the Chrysler points in the country at the time. Um, my question, I guess, to you is, why break it out more? Like, what, I know you guys developed the technology, but like, what opportunity did you see and what results did you see when you were able to add? I'm sure you probably had over 50 once you were able to like really break it out.
Yeah, are you talking about at the dealership
Yeah,
that
because
I worked at?
didn't you guys create kind of Parts Edge while you were at the dealership? So like,
Oh, yeah.
what results did you see?
Well, yeah, I developed it on that, working with Cliff, and I had well over 50, and I came up with a lot of different things. At that time, Chrysler had some QPO programs that they don't really have much anymore of, anyway. You know,
Well, we don't
and
go down that rabbit hole.
but not really. I mean, there's times, we have clients, Kaylee, as you know, some very large GM stores that they're on the CPVP program or FFV fascia grill. Every once in a while, oh, we're having a special deal on air conditioning parts. And so we'll take their list, isolate the air conditioning parts so they can try and put a stock order in, to earn the discount without overstocking themselves for 6 months, right? But, those types of programs, it makes it so much easier to isolate those parts and break them out so that you can sit and play with your phasing criteria, your day's supply, and tweak it and get, a decent stock order. You can't do that when you got all those parts all sitting in one or two sources. I always bring up, I'll die with this analogy, but milk and canned asparagus. You know, you're a grocer and you got milk, hundreds of gallons a day. It's perishable. Canned asparagus, a couple of cans a week. And if you only have one source, and you got your milk and your canned asparagus in it, what do you set your day's supply for? If you set it for the milk, what happens to the canned asparagus? You get a lot. If you set it for the canned asparagus, what happens? You run out of milk. So a lot of times parts managers, because, DMS vendors and whatnot, they'd much rather a parts manager spend an hour trying to, raise the milk up and lower the canned asparagus down instead of break it out so you don't have to worry about it and let it work more effectively,
Well,
based on the movement.
and that kind of goes into the other myth of when you hear parts managers say their DMS doesn't know what to stock. When it's set up properly, you don't have to manipulate it, and it's
Absolutely.
pulling everything up of what you need to stock.
I can't say that right now about one of them, and I already mentioned it.
Okay.
They're trying to fix the problem. So, and I have all the assurance in the world they probably will, but right now it's broke. So, yeah, and that would be that one system, Kaylee, not to harp on it, but, that's where it all falls apart. We do have one system that you couldn't trust the stock order that it generates.
Well, but even if a parts manager has 4 to 5, maybe 6 sources, they still can't really trust what it's producing. Correct?
Correct. One of the things, in fact, I had a phone conversation on this yesterday with a client, but, nothing says, when you go in and you set up your source and you give it its parameters, the phase-in criteria, the phase-out criteria, the day supply settings. If you break it down a little granularly into different sources, you can now go in and tweak and test these. I've always said this about pricing, like a matrix. People get locked into their matrix in sources, and they haven't changed it in years. They haven't evaluated. They just go, well, we're at 38% gross, have a nice day. They never really evaluate what generated that 38% and what generated, less than that. That goes to inventory. I'll give you an example with General Motors and their CPVP. For those of you that are with another make, they have a QPO program on collision parts. And they put out this list of about 2,500 part numbers every month. They add some, they get rid of some. But anyway, and there's a gentleman who does a great job out there. His name's John Mullenkamp, and he'll go out and capture these CPVP parts and put fake orders out there because some of these parts are rim guaranteed, some are not rim guaranteed. Here's my point, and what we've done with several clients is we go out and permanently restrict them. What do you care? What you're really trying to do is effectively generate a stock order without rim coming in and ordering that one grill or that one part, and all of a sudden now you can never hit your maximum to get the discount. So if you do that and you take a group of parts and isolate them, now you can sit and tweak the day's supply up or down. The day's supply is not written in stone. You can sit and play with the day's supply and regenerate stock orders into a coma. Especially, CDK, Reynolds, Dealer Track, you can sit and play with these stock orders and you don't have to validate or guarantee it. You just look at, okay, here's my results. I'm close. I need to lower my day's supply a little or up it, rerun it again. And then you finally go, bingo, I got what I want. We sit and play with that all day, and it's so easy to do that. But a lot of managers, they go, well, I don't want to manipulate my day's supply, or and some of them don't know where to go to do it.
There's that too.
Reality.
I've been asked too, and I think I know the answer to this. Just what is an accurate day supply? Like, what should their day supply setting be? Because
that's really funny you say that. And again, that's a wide answer. With the algorithms on most of these DMS systems, it's really simple. I set the day's supply, really high, high being like 20 days, on parts that are selling erratically, like one every other month or, 4 times a year. I set the day's supply really high so that it'll generate at least a stocking level of 1, okay? But the more, and this is what's really cool about the algorithms with just about every DMS, is the more you sell a part, the better the algorithm works at stocking levels and reorder points. And so this gets back to that milk. Now I want to put the milk in a completely different source, and I want to lower its day's supply because I don't want to overstock a bunch of milk. I can lower the day's supply, and it's going to make a realistic stocking level instead of, if that's in that 20-day supply, all of a sudden, I got a 20-day supply of milk. I really only need a 5-day supply, because you're basically getting orders every 24 to 48 hours from most of the manufacturers now. So, in other words, in short, Kaylee, it all depends on how much the parts sell. And you can do that source by movement and change your day's supply to make it more effective so you don't overstock or have a lot of excess inventory.
So it sounds like one of the biggest benefits to breaking out the sources other than pricing is being able to adjust the day supply settings.
Sure. Well,
what is the number
another
one
reason?
Yeah.
And this is probably the most important reason for some of the big manufacturers that have an ASR program, Aero, Rim, putting your rim protected parts in a source. Hey, you know what? They're guaranteed. Most of the attributes are shut down to where you can't order the part unless you manually force it onto an order. But now taking those parts that you are stocking and putting them in a different source and running a stock order on it, now you're isolating guaranteed parts from non-guaranteed parts. There's so many different things out there. Isolating campaign parts, accessories. Accessories and tires are a couple of things that, your phase-in criteria for us, what we do is we set the phase-in criteria 2 demands in 6 months. fairly liberal and brings it up a lot quicker than it does a 3 and 9 criteria, which is what we use as a standard. But the one thing we do on the backside is the phase out. With accessories and tires, you hold on to those for 12 months. You own them. More than likely, you're not going to be able to send them back. So at least, we set the phase out criteria very liberally on those two commodities, being accessories and tires, at 1 and 3. If you haven't sold an accessory in 3 months or a tire in 3 months, you need to get rid of it. The model's changed, something's happened. You can't do that if you have accessories mixed in with maintenance parts. No way. Let alone pricing. Because I don't know a dealer on the planet, that, if you try and matrix accessories, you're just not going to sell them. Or it's going to be short term. They're advertised everywhere. You're trying to be competitive. So, set that with no matrix and then go back on your captive items and matrix them. You can't do that. You get one matrix. You get 1 day's supply. You get one phase-in criteria if you have them all in one source.
Yeah. Okay, I have a question about pricing because we've been kind of talking about it a lot in this conversation a little bit. I feel like there's something recently that we've been discovered with some of the analysis we've been doing. Is that something you can speak to on just like manufacturer pricing and what we've found?
Well, sure. This has been twofold. For the longest time, the last couple of years, we seem to help dealerships, or at least we analyze their customer pay RO because they're looking to get a warranty uplift. Well, things are getting pretty tight out there, and now what we're starting to get is a lot of dealers going, is it worth it to be in the collision industry? And so we've done analysis on a handful of stores, which really prompted a webinar that we did recently, but how to evaluate, are you really making money in collision? And what we found out is at best, you're barely breaking even.
We kind of knew that. We kind of I feel like you've always said that for years,
Well, yeah, and there are some dealers out there, some very large dealers that they can do a CPVP order a couple of times a week. They're very large stores, and here they get, a 10, 12, 13% discount. The FVVP program, the Fascia Grill, that used to be you could get 17% off. Now they're down to a flat 4%. GM took that away, but still they buy 40,000 at one time, and all of a sudden they have a 4% head start against someone who's buying everything at DealerNet. So, when you're trying to compete with this list minus 37 off, list minus 35 off, for God's sake, I remember when, they had better be a really good customer if I'm going to give them list minus 30. That is like dinosauric. And, that unfortunately is because, forget the manufacturers, it and the body shops, these poor people, they're trying to make a profit just like you are. It really boils down to the insurance industry completely controlling the market. I always say this, and it'll never happen. I said this in the webinar, but and I heard this quote from a manager that we did an analysis for. Everybody would love to go to list minus 25 or list minus 30, but the problem is it's a prostitution market, and someone out there, uneducated manager, not recognizing and realizing gross and net, will give the 35 off to try and pick up the volume. Unbeknownst to them, they're not going to make any money, and they're going to build a lot of obsolescence. I love that term. I couldn't say it any better.
Yeah, good thing we're in the car business.
Yeah.
Okay, so I want to talk about, but there was something else with pricing that we did with some analysis with manufacturers not updating or something happening with something.
Well, what it is, and you find this out, there's a real simple way. You as a parts manager or fixed ops director listening, what you can do is capture a pad. This is really simple. Capture everything in your inventory and capture the part number capture the costs and capture the list. And then subtract, list from cost to give you what the profit margin is. And then go over and build a gross profit percentage. For years, up until a few years ago, everybody could depend on cost plus 67 or a 40% profit margin. And what we found out is the manufacturers are now matrixing some of this stuff, AKA, there's not the 40% profit margin. Some parts, they got 30%, 28%, and it's not just accessories. It happens to be some of their hard parts too. So, you never know unless you don't know what you don't know, but it's really easy to go out there and capture an inventory pad with costs and lists subtracted out and see what is suggested retail from my manufacturer. And that's a way that we've seen some dwindling profits because of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's been really interesting. The last myth to cover is just everyone always talks about obsolescence, right? It's just one of the myths that everyone says it just happens. Obsolescence is it is essentially part of doing business, but I think there's a level that it can be out of control, right? So I guess let's speak on sources,
Well,
obsolescence. I don't
yeah,
know.
and this doesn't have a lot to do with sources, but
Yeah.
it really
Me.
has to do with, and I love telling the story and I don't mind telling it again. And,
Oh,
you
which
know,
one is this?
I happened to be at a seminar and there was uh, Art Neiman, who was a HR expert in our industry. Art got up and he did a seminar, and it was called, when's the right time to fire an employee? I know, Chuck, what the heck's that got to do with inventory? Well, let me get to it. So, he came out and said, the right time to fire an employee is before you hire, to vet them better, go through things. Well, that really rings true in the parts end of it. And what I mean by then is making sure what is ordered, especially in the special order process, which is, a necessity in what we do with new vehicles, new product, and so forth. We're always getting a new set of part numbers, is, making sure that the technicians have the right tool to diagnose it correctly. I went through that at my dealership where I found out the technician said, well, we only got one of these tools and we really need four of them. And the customers that special order parts under warranty and it's non-critical, that they come back, a real good follow-up system, makes a huge difference. It's a trickle down. Control what you're ordering, make sure what is ordering is needed as much as you can. That controls aging inventory and obsolescence, and nothing says, there's some myth too, and I've seen people do this. They take their obsolescence and they isolate it in a source, and then they go, anything in this source, we're going to discount and sell below cost. And on platforms where you're advertising that, like OE Connection or a parts broker, that's not a bad idea. But, one of the things I always try to tell everybody is when a customer comes to buy a part, and it's not another dealership and you're trying to move it at a lower price, but when a customer comes to the dealership, they need that part. They don't know that you've written it down or that you want to get rid of it. You can still make your profit on it. Maybe you sell it with a 10% discount off a list. And that isolating that gives you some ability, to fluctuate with pricing such as that. We've seen a lot of dealers that will write off parts and put them at a penny. And dear God, I think that's the worst thing you should do. And I'll tell you why. If you got $20,000 worth of inventory that you want to throw away, and you've got that 20,000 banked, leave the parts that you're going to write off at cost, because if you happen to sell that, if you have it at a penny and then you sell it at retail, now you're going to pay gross profit and show this gross profit. And typically, unless you've been paid off the net, like the dealer is, and some of the parts managers and fixed ops director, The only people who participate in the write-off at net are those people that are paid off the net. The gross profit people, hey, I just sold a $450 part and made $450 because it was at a penny. You're paying commission on gross. They just make gross on 450. You ate the 300 when you threw it away.
So that's a lot. You see
You
that?
know, it does. I don't know where the practice came from, uh, but to me personally, I like to treat it like if you're going to accrue money for obsolescence, and we have some dealers that do this, and I think this is probably the most prudent way, is they actually will take like $10,000 and accrue it every month into a write-off process. And then what we do is we isolate those parts in a source. And so you got this asset account set up there for writing off. And so what you want to make sure of is that the parts you're going to write off, let's say it's $50,000 and you got 50,000 in the piggy bank. Once you make the decision to write them off and throw them away, you just offset the asset account. But if you don't, at least you got them isolated in a source so once you sell it, you don't reorder it. That's one. But at the other point, why sit there and change it to a penny? I got burnt that way.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, you're talking to someone who went, yeah, I'll put it at a penny. And then it only took several times selling some high dollar parts that I went, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I got paid off the net and I had to pay for that accrual. And then a counter person got paid gross to sell it. There was no incentive for that counter person to sell that part.
Yeah.
Some customer came to it. We had it. The counter person go, wow, this is at a penny. I'm going to make a lot of money. Yay.
Yeah.
So
That's
that,
crazy. So I have another
yeah.
question. And it's, I mean, not to make this all about obsolescence, but I think it's a good question because what percentage of your inventory is acceptable to be writing off? Because like I think a lot of times we get into conversations with dealers and they're like, I'm sick of throwing $50,000 away. It's like, what's acceptable? I mean, it should
Well,
obviously be zero, but it
what's
can't.
acceptable? You're talking to a parts consultant, okay, and an armchair quarterback. Zero.
I know, I just
That's
said that.
acceptable.
Yeah.
But, one of the things now we're back to controlling what's being ordered, and that's one of the reasons why we put such a key emphasis in the way we manage parts inventories like a banker is, we really focus on that 7 to 12 aging process. We look at that, we break it down, divide it by 6 months and go, okay, we're forecasting we need $6,000 a month because that's what we got coming on at us in that 7 to 12.
Mhm.
Start to focus and control those parts that are being ordered. Now the 7 to the 12 goes down, the obsolescence goes down. You don't have to accrue as much. Kaylee, you've been in on these conversations 100 times. The dealer all of a sudden decides to bite the bullet and throw away $100,000. And the first thing they do is they turn to the parts manager, and the first thing they tell them is it better not come back. I'm writing this off. And yet then you go to 7 to 12 months and you determine they don't have hardly any accrual. And you know what? In 6 months, they're going to have $30,000 again because of the aging process and what's coming at them. So, that's the intelligent way to look at it is, step one is controlling special orders, which, by the way, controlling special orders, there's another reason we have a source just for special order parts. We track them. Hey, they're over 30 days old. Danger, danger. What's going on? Then, once they sell to zero, we move them back out. But to be able to look at all these open special orders and make sure that customers are coming back in, that the parts were truly needed, that focus right there leads to lack of obsolescence. Because, right now, from top to bottom, and I'm pretty damn accurate, when you throw out all the protective parts with ASR programs and whatnot, the average dealership has almost 20% obsolescence. And 10, 12 years ago, 10% was, in fact, the NADA average
It's
back in
10.
2010, this 15 years ago, was try and keep it at or under 10%. You that's grown up to about 20% because of changes in processes and the way the manufacturer return programs have dwindled away and whatnot. They
Yeah.
only guarantee what sells, and they give you very little to try and return those parts.
Yes, that is true. It has shifted. I don't think
Yeah.
that 10% is realistic. Although to set the record, we don't shoot for that with our dealerships. We have dealerships well under 10.